Linton was dead, and his raw genetic material was used to bring forth an identity. And whatever this identity was, I doubt that they're going to be friendly. Ishmael was questioning what this meant. A perfected identity? Honglu was asking who Azia was talking about. Then Nene said that he was coming back. The Heathcliff variant, fully primed and fully stable in that world. Before Dante could react, the Heathcliff variant announced his return. He whose existence itself had become a sin, had returned to put an end to them all. Heathcliff was not pleased to see himself. Then Josephine appeared, addressing the variant as an accursed beast, infernal demon. He's finally come to take the manor. Well, she's aiming it at one that actually deserves it this time. She told Kathy that she'll not let he who dared to stain the honour of that manor. Then the Heathcliff variant killed her brutally before she could finish. This made the variant laugh manically. Every Wuthering Heights at the end of all things in every world eventually became his. Every death that Hindley and Linton suffered was pathetic and writhing. Seeing this as immutable truth. Quite a fatalistic view, isn't it? So he saw Josephine as his as well. She's bound to heed his commands. Well, she's certainly his to kill. Although in fairness, she did try to kill him. Even as she was dying, Josephine called to Kathy that the vagabond The variant was growing tired of her ramblings, seeing Catherine as a rotting corpse, with decaying flesh and desiccated bone. So he snapped Josephine's neck, finishing her off. She was limp and motionless after that. He then shouted at them, saying that Josephine, Hindley, Linton, seeing them as pitiful souls tangled and fettered to that accursed destiny in every world. Don't you mean every world that Mr. Earnshaw found you, that you've been to? I mean, have you ever found a world where Dicey Association found you? That's a world where you never met any of them. Well, at the very least, the Heathcliff variant has certainly seen them, well, variants of them, more times than he'd care to remember throughout the multiverse. He'll take those pitiful souls who remain bound to Wuthering Heights, even in death. Ooh, he's turned into a necromancer. Yes, even in that world, we need to burn the necro. Because at that point he summoned his army, husks of dead Pekatula, many variations of Linton, Hindley, and Josephine, all materialize and rise, forming a procession. They all joined in a march, an army of the dead. The variant Heathcliff saw this as the final chapter of this tale. He was the vanguard of this march, and he then picked up the coffin and put it on his back. Ooh, he's clearly stronger than the Heathcliff we know. And that's clearly quite heavy, and there's no G-Corp gravity spheres on him. Heathcliff wasn't pleased with the variant, telling him that he can't do that to Catherine. The variant saw this as a game to play, asking if he remembers that they both used to play games with their Catherines on the rooftop. Seeing this as a good time to remember that. The variant had decided to test him. If they wished to join him and his army, they should pursue him through the stairwell until his strength fails. Heathcliff wanted to seize him. Sadly, he had an undead march in the way, comprised of a number of variants of those he knew, likely those that the Heathcliff variant had killed. The variant made it clear that it won't be that easy, nor should it be. Believing that his heart towards Catherine shan't be realized so painlessly, he needs to suffer more, to let desperation consume him, to become frenzied in his pursuit. Well, life without pain has no meaning. What else is new? Dante's attention was caught by the mention of the rooftop. Faust reminding them of that location being where the golden bar was located, as for what happens when two golden bars come into physical contacts. Otis could think of 1,000 different outcomes, and there's likely to be none of those that are positive. The best is probably a mixed outcome, but Heathcliff doesn't give a all that matters is that whatever the variant is planning to do with Catherine, they have to stop him. Gregor observed that their retreat had been cut off. They were trapped. Dante asked if they were Hindley, Linton, and Josephine from other worlds. Faust confirmed this. Their imperfect identities. Someone from random worlds. The fate of those that became thralls of that Heathcliff variant. She calls this phenomenon, in which a mirror world entity that wreaks havoc through different parallel worlds in pursuit of every Heathcliff, is a wild hunt. Ryushu compared it to an event called the Nocturnal March of 100 Demons, which according to Japanese folklore is a parade of supernatural creatures that marches through the streets at night during summer. The lucky ones that encounter them would be killed. The unlucky ones would be spirited away, unless they had protective exorcism scrolls. Dante asked if there was an end to them. Faust said no. The variant of Heathcliff that they were pursuing was the conduit that brought them to that world, leading that army as its Erlkönig, or the Elking, which in European folklore is an elf that stalks children who stays in the woods too long, killing them by just touching them. This is mostly in German and Danish folklore. Basically, according to Faust, as long as Elking Heathcliff won't stop, his army won't stop. And then they saw this as a brutal tempest descending on them, as the fight against this army began. After taking out a number of dead rabbits, along with an alternate Linton and an alternate Josephine, Heathcliff was so heavily wounded he struggled to stay standing, never mind wield his weapon. He then swore like a certain foul-mouthed Scottish chef whenever he saw a kitchen that was below acceptable standards. Run by the monarch of Cordon Bleu, where it'd be Yumbongs when it was a competition between Gregor and Ryushu all over again. Anyway, he promised to himself that he'd return a changed man, so that he could stand proud before Catherine, so that she wouldn't be embarrassed of him. Yet he couldn't protect her. He couldn't get nearer to her or hold his weapon properly. Dante wanted to tell Heathcliff something, but Heathcliff intercepted them, telling them that he doesn't have anything to show for his life. Rather show for in his life. I mean, he made it clear that he wasn't educated. He didn't hide it that he had a few shorter than Warwick Davis when he was playing an Ewok. And he had a brutish personality. Then he was actually respectful of Dante, asking them if that endless, overwhelming flood was what it was like to face his sins. Was his life so wretched that he deserved to suffer that endless swarm of sins? Personally, I think if that's the case, it's disproportionate retribution. Dante wanted to believe it wasn't true, wanted to encourage the will and determination to forge on, that the seemingly impenetrable mist would part, and they would see light at the end of the tunnel. That isn't a vehicle coming towards them to run them over. What they endured, what they learned, it couldn't be for nothing. Not wanting him to doubt the path that they're showing him, but then Massault noticed that more were coming in greater numbers. Dante saw only absolute darkness without a hint of light. They were asking what they should do, when even they were starting to feel lost. They then fought more dead rabbits, Phase 2 Pecatula, and even Phase 3 Pecatula, along with more variants of Linton, Josephine, Hindley, and even distorted Hindley, with seemingly no end in sight for the damned dozen. Just as they were taking on a seemingly endless horde of Phase 3 Pecatula, specifically one with the sin of wrath, a voice told them that when you lose sight of your path, when you no longer know which road to take, a red shield then appeared on Heathcliff, and then an orange flash appeared, and the Picatulum threatening Heathcliff was no more. Then the voice's source was revealed. It was Virgilius, the Red Gaze, there to save them when they most needed it, telling them that the guide shall show them the way, readying his gladius to defend Dante and the others. Dante didn't see this coming. Rodio was struggling to believe that this was real. Yes, this was the same Virgilius who didn't seem to give a about what happened to them, and stayed out of their battles. Yet he entered the basement and sliced through the wild hunt that was down there. Don Quixote looked like she was about to go on her knees before Virgilius, with Ryushu doing so alongside her, both prostrating before him, chanting, "We're not worthy! We're not worthy!" Don Quixote was unsure if this was real, asking Virgilius to pinch her. Virgilius saw that she still had enough energy to speak. So, no, Don Quixote, you're not in Mushroom Land, he's really there. Don Quixote realized this and was overjoyed. After that, the battle continued as the wild hunt came for them, but with a colour fixer with them. This fight was going to get one-sided, and not just due to his ability to wield sin to augment his strength, and his gladius that's possibly enhanced with Stigma Workshop technology. After a lull in the fighting, Rodia asked why he was there, while making it clear that she was thankful that he was. For Virgilius, he felt something that was too personal for him to disregard underneath the manor. The husks, the wailings. He likely remembered a similar lab in what was revealed to be District 14, which led to almost everything that mattered to him being destroyed, or otherwise changed, 17 months before. Then he saw the main concern of the present. The wild hunt was still coming for them. Of course, Dante didn't know about his past, but they had more of an idea than they did but previously. Ishmael found it hard to believe that he's intervening. He's never done that since their journey started in District 4. Virgilius confirmed this, and he admitted that he shouldn't have. but he couldn't devote his time on those whose path had ended. Gregor assumes that he was talking about the Pekatula. Virgilius confirmed this. He told them that he would deal with the wild hunt and the Pekatula in the basement. Sinclair had some concerns about this, as there's literally no end to them. Concerned about his chances to do so for long enough. He stopped himself before he could complete the question, "Can you handle this?" But Virgilius could figure that out, and answered, "Yes, it's why I'm handling this." It was at this point when Virgilius no longer held himself back and manifested his blood magic wielding Ichio that he manifested 17 months ago during his battle with Schadenfreude, despite Carmen's best efforts to get him to distort. He demonstrated his mastery over this Ichio by controlling the freshly spilt blood and turning it into projectiles that descended upon his enemies like he was the Persian archers trying to kill King Leonidas of Sparta and his 300. Then he formed a spear in his hand, and before anyone could react, he pierced through his opponents. Faust was about to say something. It was clear that she didn't see this as part of his duties as guide, as stated in his contract. She was about to remind him about that, but she didn't need to. He understood that this would bite him in the at some point, just not that day. He wouldn't be receiving everything that he wanted from the contract. Avarice would need to be sacrificed. He'll need to compromise on certain things, possibly give up on a few favourable clauses, and he'll likely be summoned to some bothersome meetings. Personally, I see it as necessary, as it would only be a matter of time before the damned dozen were all down and Dante couldn't revive them safely. Yet, he had to come there. He decided to swim against the flow, determination be damned. But he couldn't let what was unfolding go on any longer. Faust understood. Heathcliff told him that he didn't like leaving family behind if he could help it. Virgilius noticed that they were quite talkative that day, not following orders without question. He's not a weakling, so he had things under control. They have bigger problems. Besides, he can take care of them more effectively, and then he looked at his gladius. He once left that weapon in the care of someone that he knew. He should have returned that weapon into his hands, but he couldn't. That blade was all that remained, abandoned to the ground. He was, of course, talking about Garnet, one of the orphans that he watched over. An orphan that he made, alongside Lapis and some of the others, when he killed their syndicate parents. Specifically, the members of that syndicate. And Garnet eventually became a fixer working for his office, and was part of an investigation into the ring that led to the District 14 lab, only to end up seemingly distorting after the inner despair of the Black Silence identity that he was wielding made him give up the battle against Maestro Jumsun of the Ring. Ryushu recognized the gladius, clearly a master-crafted weapon in her eyes, as in not something that you could just walk into any workshop and buy. It's none of that mass-produced. You probably had to find a decent workshop and fork out a fortune in Arn to have that made. His wish was that none would have to understand the meaning of that sight. Which roughly translated meant their enemies were. His attention was then focused on the Pekatula and the wild hunt. During this, he briefly thought of family, a word that he hadn't used for at least 17 months, as it was blood-drenched. He said this as his crown of thorns was making his head bleed. His mantle of blood rippled into existence once more. Dante understood that they should leave this to Virgilius. They have Earl King Heathcliff to deal with, and they had more of the wild hunt in the way, even if they were comparatively few compared to what they faced earlier. Well, it looks like this was too personal for Virgilius to wait until they've all been taken down to intervene, even though it would cause him to lose out on much that he sought to gain. The memory of his failure to protect the orphans, Lapis changing into Charon, Garnet being lost, and it's unclear what exactly happened to him. It was too painful for him to be a bystander this time around, as he didn't want history to repeat itself, not even with those that he could barely tolerate in a situation where if they push him too far, they're in for a world of pain, even by the Project Moon universe's standards. Even if he would want to do the right thing sometimes, regardless of the consequences. And Faust implied that she knew of his contract, and he was aware of the price that he'd pay for their continued survival. Yeah, no good deed ever goes unpunished. Well, that's certainly applicable in this case. As they fought through the wild hunt that was in the way of their primary targets, Ishmael asked, how could there be two golden bowers there? I mean, the Edgar family were rich, but they're not that wealthy. Certainly not on a scale of a corporation or a syndicate. Honglu remembered one was acquired by Linton, where he spent almost all of his fortune on it, and he didn't know where the second one came from. Massault understood that a third party was involved. Those that had shared interests as, well, certainly similar business as Linton and Catherine. Urtis was able to figure out that based on what they got from Asia, the source was Herman, one aligned with Encore, as in those that stole the Golden Bower in District 4. Rodier didn't see that every day. Encore hiring former Ring researchers. Nellie asked if they were travelling with Heathcliff, collecting the golden bars. Urtis confirmed this. Nellie understood that they had to fight so many people in their journey. Gregor understood that every day has been a battlefield. They've seen more than their fair share of battles. Gregor and Urtis certainly have some battlefield experience certainly before they were recruited into Limbus Company, as both were Smoke War veterans. The latter based on her Zayn EGO image. A similar background was visible through that as Gregor's. Well, Urtis didn't disagree with that, except they've tasted nothing but victory so far. Well, District 4 was a Pyrrhic victory, if it was. Nellie understood. She then asked why were they looking for the golden bar? Ryushu said that it was because they were bored. Well, she was, certainly. Roger hoped that it would lead to loads of money. Don Quixote saw it as an act of justice! Ishmael saw it as part of their contracts. As for their planning, she didn't know what they were being used for. Nelly understood that none of them knew what it would be used for. She asked Heathcliff if he was scared, doing everything Limbus Company wants him to do without a single question, asking if he was worried about what happened next. He told her that he's always had a singular goal. They do this because Dante keeps reminding them of their individual goals. He's never been afraid. Then they heard the sound of horse hooves echoing above them. As for right at that point, he had one goal. They have to go after that gate. They can't let him take Catherine to the rooftops where the second golden barrel was. Nelly was unsure of that, asking if it was too late now, as they were slow and he was swift. Dante remembered that Virgilius bought them that opportunity, understanding that he had to sacrifice something of his to assist them, all for their sake. They didn't want to waste this chance. Ishmael asked if it was the only way to the rooftops. Nelly said yes. Eurytus was annoyed by the dregs that Earl King Heathcliff sent after them, slowing them down. Dante knew that strength to defeat them wasn't needed. They needed time. Then Dante asked Faust, she was asking if this was out of pure curiosity, but, she allowed it. Dante reasons that there's a good reason why their head was in the shape of a clock. Faust confirmed that it wasn't randomly chosen or without intent, followed by concepts and symbols adherent to the laws of causality. Dante then continued by asking if the Golden Bar had powers that they've yet to be made aware of. Faust understood that they're not asking a question, they want confirmation. She told them to do as they willed, as one sought the stars in the night sky. Dante reasoned if they could turn back time for the damned dozen. Then what was to stop them from... if they can't accelerate or shorten it? As in either time dilation or reverse time dilation, as in either slower or faster, relative to the rest of reality. They didn't want Heathcliff to be tied down to his past like Earl King Heathcliff did. Then Dante tested out their new power that they decided to test out. Sync there felt strange. They seemed faster, fast enough to outrun their enemies. Faust explained that it wasn't temporal acceleration. They were surrounded by a time dilation field, where they were immune from its effects. Everything around them was frozen, except them, within a certain radius. Well, at least it slowed down to the point where they seemed frozen. Roger understood that it allowed them to catch up to Earl King Heathcliff. Their Heathcliff asked Dante if it was their doing. Dante thought so. Dante imagined that they would complain that it would have been good to have earlier, but they'd rather not encourage them to do so, as even they didn't know that they had access to that power. They just began to feel the possibility out of nowhere. Heathcliff understood that every one he's gone through in his life either ignored him, scorned him, or he simply lost the plot before they even had a chance to build anything. A mess. But Dante, He asked what was wrong with them. Why do they have any hope for him? They didn't need to go that far for his sake. Limbus Company doesn't give a about what happened. The others wouldn't care either. Why were they trying so hard? He didn't believe that he deserved any of that. Dante told him that it was because then King Heathcliff on his headless horse was caught up to. Ishmael told Heathcliff to focus on their targets as he was getting away. This made him focus on his targets, the one that took Catherine in her coffin. With the help of their time dilation fields provided by Dante, they were able to catch up with King Heathcliff. An angered Heathcliff told him to stop. He wouldn't let him get away this time. He told that git to give Catherine back. King Heathcliff told him that even if he was to pursue him and grab him, it would change nothing. Catherine already left him. That's the undeniable truth, isn't it? Shovel up the soil and exhume her body all he wants, but the truth is immutable. There she lies, wearing an ineffable, ethereal smile that she always had. Well, in your world perhaps, but not here. Heathcliff is doing all he can to change that, telling him to shut up. This amused King Heathcliff. He told him something to attempt to relieve him of that struggle. He'd suffer, longing for her for as much as time permits, searching for Catherine who is long gone from that world, until his heart finds peace. Again, not your Catherine. That applies to yours. I mean, his is on your back? Every strand of despair will lead to the same answer. All paths lead to the same location. He'll mutter that to himself, that once his repentance is complete, he'll lie beside her in that coffin, with his cold, still heart. This is apparently meant to relieve the years of suffering from his shoulders, telling him to join the other Heathcliffs in their trial of repentance, and he'll grant them the early peace of his heart that he deserves. Yeah, clearly you missed that, but he's died a number of times just to get to this point. That's something that even a straw nihilist would be able to notice. Besides, he's not going to stay dead, at least until he's dealt with his unfinished business. Heathcliff practically gave himself the finger regarding this idea of peace, as it wasn't his idea of peace. King Heathcliff asked if he'd say the same thing if he knew that all of this was exactly as Catherine wanted. Well, considering that you've been deranged by grief, guilt and rage, I'd take your opinion with extreme caution. Then the battle against King Heathcliff began. He was tougher than he was last time, and he demonstrated the ability to protect his thralls/soldiers of the Wild Hunt with explosive shields of wrath, gloom, and envy. The damned dozen would need to take one of these down in order to gain a brief advantage over King Heathcliff. He also gains 15 sanity with each ally's death, so getting his sanity into negative numbers would be more difficult, even if it was involving a sinking team. Which is surprising because he's not all there in the sanity department to begin with. He also seems to wield a unique weapon. It's unclear if this ruined blade of the mirror worlds was a weapon made during his multiversal killing spree, or if this is his EGO fully manifested. But he attacks with a combination of bleeding his enemies and eating away at their minds. Yet even with his increased power, their combined might was able to beat him down. Heathcliff then demanded that he give Catherine back. Earl King Heathcliff claimed that she was forever lost, her consciousness broken, scattered to 1,000 pieces. Heathcliff told him to shut up. He'd need to do worse to make him give up. Earl King Heathcliff was struck down and he fell to his knees. They were less than 10 paces from the rooftop. Dante knew what had to be done in order for him to be stopped from going up the stairs. This needed to happen no matter what. Thankfully, there was a solution. Masol had his Zayn EGO, Chain of Others, which he used to bind Earl King Heathcliff, although Masol couldn't do this for long, advising that he be neutralized as soon as possible, which they carried out. Nelly then gave Earl King Heathcliff the sleepy smack, which is apparently a lesser-known skill of butlers. Faust saw that their priority should be finding out who it was that showed Earl King Heathcliff the knowledge of all those variants of himself and Catherine, along with the existence of the mirror worlds. Yes, all those parallel Earths. Dante understood that she knows all things, but there are gaps in even her knowledge. She agreed with them regarding this. Dante decided not to push her farther. That can wait until her group therapy session comes. They need to focus on the more immediate problem. Faust agreed. Firstly is how Catherine gained a keen interest in studying the mirror worlds, as she led a relatively normal life before Heathcliff left Wuthering Heights. This behavior stood out. Ishmael understood that someone was acting behind the scenes, encouraging this. Faust agreed. Specifically, someone handed to Catherine that mirror, which resulted in that laboratory being built in the basement. The same person also invited Earl King Heathcliff there as well. Masol deduced there had to be someone close to Catherine, someone who she heavily relied on. Rutis hesitated briefly before telling Dante that she needed to voice a few suspicions, asking if they recall what Nelly said when they first encountered the Golden Burrow in the basement. She said, There! Is that the Golden Burrow you were looking for?" Dante agreed that she did say that. Rutis pointed out that she couldn't have known that they were actively seeking those out. All she knew that it was what Catherine's will left to Heathcliff. When they encountered the dead rabbit in the corridor, she claimed that the word on the street was that they must be wary of dead rabbits with red eyes. But in the streets, no colour would be seen, red or otherwise. Rodia pointed out that she couldn't even see their eyes. Otis then made it clear that she was already aware of that face before they encountered them. Dante understood that they can't let Nellie anywhere near Earl King Heathcliff. When they realized this, it was too late. She told Earl King Heathcliff to ascend to the rooftops, all but confirming that she was playing them all this time. This confused Heathcliff. Why was she talking to him? Earl King Heathcliff asked him if he still truly didn't understand. Nellie invited him there, summoned him there, gave him information to utterly destroy Hindley. She even introduced him to Isabella. Apparently it's because they were both tired of enduring. He was then freed by Nellie's hand, much to the horror of Dante. He then disappeared to the rooftop. Nellie's betrayal hit Heathcliff the hardest. Then we see how Nellie really felt about Heathcliff, telling him that the manor has never been on his side, not even once. She also didn't like that he used the expression betrayal, as betrayal would apply to those only that were allies. Heathcliff approached her slowly. Dante couldn't imagine how painful this was to him. He was resisting the urge to bash her head in, and asked, why? Nellie was actually relieved that he changed, as she was expecting him to hit her with his baseball bat without even asking her. Heathcliff was angered by this, saying that's because it's her, asking if he has to destroy even their childhood. Nellie paused for a few seconds, asking what was he most afraid of. She wasn't afraid of the ghost that Catherine claimed to see, or even the tempest that sometimes shook Wuthering Heights, or even how violent Hindley could be when drunk. Until one day, she became afraid. Specifically of an old woman whose heart and body were aged beyond her years. This was her, one that suffered because of Heathcliff and Catherine in every world. At least every world that she saw, all of them were plagued by hatred, misunderstandings, obsessions, and she was dragged under the wheel of destruction, suffering until the end. The worst part of that was they were all ignorant of their doomed fates, that those two were consumed by all this, and were consuming her, every bit of her life, and not quickly. So, she showed it to her too, making it clear that Nellie was the one that gave Catherine the mirror, specifically a mirror shard that showed what the beholder wanted to see. Faust understood what this meant, seeing that these shards can make countless cracks in the hearts of humans, shaking the foundation of one's existence. Clearly, the knowledge of parallel worlds is not something that many can handle, as it can make everything that they've done and worked for seem meaningless. Doubts would follow from that. Doubts about where they were going. It can cause them to attempt to interfere with events in other worlds, believing that it was the right thing to do. In the case of Earl King Heathcliff, even if he's meaning well by him killing all the variants of himself, he's causing more harm than good. Faust decided that if Nellie was shown that mirror, then this was the intended outcome. Yi Sang understood that a mirror technology that allows for such high degree of interactivity must be... Well, he certainly recognized that, as he's developed a similar device. Nellie then said that everything began to unravel all on its own. She talked with one on the other side of the mirror for a lengthy amount of time, one that suffered as much as she did. That's when the laboratory took shape. Catherine had no knowledge of this. She never doubted Nellie, even as she closed her eyes in that coffin. Nellie seeing her as a sheltered child, a caged bird. That and her temperament, the kind of person that wants to be the center of everything. Heathcliff responded with stony silence. She begged him not to deny every memory they shared together. Her pity was genuine when they abused him. She wished that he'd live his best life, a life better than anyone else's. This didn't stop Nellie from standing against him and the others. She was an agile opponent and would prioritize staggered targets. Yes, opponents that were staggered, using her knives to at least try and kill them. After staggering her, her mind and body appeared spent. She was weighed down by the time that sinking her into the oblivion of history. Then one of the combatants approached Nellie, which provided an odd desire in Nellie. It was unclear if this was envy or anticipation, telling the Chosen that she gave her a mirror most beautiful, most alluring. It was as gorgeous as a lively manicure. This made Nellie shudder, as she was caught in an ineffable emotion. Yes, an ineffable emotion. Then she muttered in a cold, detached voice. Then she saw the kind of life that was laid out before her. Then the Chosen leapt backward, away from the sudden metallic noise, but it was too late. Clearly, Nellie shopped in a similar workshop to Una of the Dawn office, as her suitcase had chains coming out of it that wrapped around the Chosen's arm. She refused to be bound by Heathcliff and Catherine. It's done. Though movements were restricted, there might be a way to use this against Nellie. And passing this check increased the Chosen's capacity to deal damage by 2. If the check failed, the Chosen would be chained in a way that left their vitals exposed, and they'd be more fragile by 2. Then she will bind those that she can, slowing them down. But even that won't be enough for them to be subdued by her. In turn, they subdued her. Nellie told them that Catherine was difficult from time to time, but she didn't wish to deny even the times that they spent together. She even missed Catherine's father from time to time. This wasn't out of hate or animosity. She's just struggling desperately to change her destiny. To get to where she was, she worked hard, to the point where she almost worked herself to death and trained just as hard, all to become chief butler. Heathcliff said one word in response: move. Nellie was disappointed that he still wants to get to the rooftops, seeing this as fruitless, as Earl King Heathcliff was already there, seeing this as where the tale will end, seeing this as a better ending, as he and Catherine didn't have the courage to talk to one another. Heathcliff told her to stop it, using all of his willpower to resist the urge to finish her off. Then we see the real Nellie, someone who has strong resentment towards them, as they both believed everything that she told them, not doubting her at all, accepted as truth. Then we see the past, where she told Catherine that Heathcliff hasn't sent any letters to her, telling her that she's quite certain that he must be living a good life somewhere out there, telling her that she'll send the invitation, saying that it's still the same Heathcliff who didn't even bother to write to her, but when he sees that, he'll have no choice but to return to that manner. Then we get to close to the present, where Nellie told Heathcliff that she didn't recall her ever opening a letter, as once she had her mind on something, none could convince her otherwise. Then we found out that it was Nellie who burned the letters in the incinerator, so she was lying to Catherine that Heathcliff didn't send her any. Although she was being honest when she said that she didn't recall Catherine ever receiving any letters from him, largely because Nellie intercepted them before she could receive them. In the present, Nellie saw that they mired more people than they could imagine with this, yet they didn't even talk to one another or ask questions. Did they believe that they could move on with such slothfulness? Did he... Nellie, did you never consider trying to help them? Or did you resent them for having what you didn't? The freedom to choose your own path? Doing what you're doing is as understandable as you burning those letters. It's quite petty when you think of it that way. Thankfully, Heathcliff wasn't aware of the specifics, as if he knew that you burned the letters that he sent, you'd be taking a one-way trip, and it involved you dying and going to the other place. Yes, you'd be going to the other place. Probably. Anyway, she told them no more. The tale ended there. So when it came to what increased the torment of Heathcliff and Catherine, making Hindley go broke, and involving N-Corp in this, as it was put in an Agatha Christie novel, the butler did it. Sorry, couldn't help it. Well, until next time. Hail the rabbits!